everyone, it's Joanna here from Inspired by Stamping, and today I'm so excited to share with you this no-line watercolor tutorial featuring our cherry blossom stamp set. This is so beautiful and so fun, and I'm only using 3 watercolors to create this beautiful image. So I've already cut out my paper, and I'm using Arches hot press watercolor paper, and it's 3 3/4 by 3 3/4. And I'm also using our Big Sympathy stamp set, and I've cut the cardstock in the direction that I absolutely love, and some crochet trim and ribbon, and I think that this is going to be so fun. So let's get started. I've already got my cherry blossom on my acrylic block, and I'm just going to stamp it up with some Versamark. And as you probably just quickly noticed, that Versamark is pretty old. I think it's about 10 years old. It's so old. So what I ended up doing is I ended up adding a little bit of antique linen distress ink, and I used the refill, and I just kind of went over it back and forth to just kind of stain that just a little bit so I can see that image. And you can see, you kind of see that outline right there, and it just helps me to see where I'm going, because the new Versamark is so clear you can't tell where you're putting that image at. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this Copic multi-liner, and it's a 0.5, and it's so important that you use a watercolor pen, because what we're going to do is we're going to go over that beautiful inside of that cherry blossom very gently, and just so that we know where those lines are, because once we start watercoloring, we're going to lose that detail, because you're going to put layer over layer and you're not going to be able to know where those are. So it's really key right now that you take that time and you just go over it. You can use different kind of pens, but just make sure that it really says watercolor. And another key, if you feel like you're not sure if it's going to be watercolor, just grab your heat gun and just blast it with a little bit of heat, and hopefully that will set to perfectly. I don't need to do that with these Copic multi-liner pens. They're beautiful. You can go layer over layer of watercolor over them and it will not run at all. So what I'm using right now, as I zoom in, I'm using our Opera Rose Winsor Newton watercolor, and it's a professional grade watercolor paint. I have tried a different kind of watercolor paints, but I really just keep going back to the professional grade, and they are a bit expensive, but if you really want to create beautiful images, you really need to invest in that. And I'm also using that Arches hot pressed paper, and it's very important to get the hot pressed paper, and it's very smooth, and that's for doing these botanical images, and that is also a very, very important thing. So what I've done is I've grabbed some Opera Rose, and I'm using just a little bit with a lot of water, and it's putting down that first wash. It's so important that you put down a first wash here, and that just helps glide on those layers later on. So I know where I'm going, because I can see that little bit of stain on that Versamark, and I know where I'm going. It's so light though that you don't have to fight with your image as you sometimes do if you use a distress ink. Antique linen. Sometimes I find that that's even too dark for me to use. So I really love this Versamark technique. And so you're just going to keep going over and putting that wash off over. It doesn't have to be perfect right now. You can put it any which direction or form that you want to. You could just slop it on. Doesn't matter. Just make sure that your brush isn't overloaded with water, because then you'll start getting a little bit too much of a bloom. And just kind of keep going over. I'm using a number 3 brush here. It's nice and little, it's thin, and it just helps with those little details. So today I'm using a number 3, a number 1, and I think I've used a number 5 a couple times too. As we go along, you'll see that. And so what we'll do right now is I'm done with my pinks. We're going to switch over to some Winsor Newton, a little bit of yellow, and we're going to be using the blue-green shade too. And that is just going to be, again, a nice light wash, very light. And while we're working on the leaves, those pink petals now will be able to dry. Everything dries pretty quickly, and so you don't have to really wait too long for everything to dry, and you can keep working. I think this project took about 20 minutes to do, and I think if you're going to do a lot of cards, you can kind of lay them out and do the little wash first, and then go over to your next card and keep going if you want to make a couple cards at the same time. So I'm just continuously laying down a very, very light first wash here. And again, it's just don't have to worry about which direction that you're going in because you won't really see this layer because we'll be going over and over and over again. I just finished very lightly going over these leaves. And as you can see, I'm going pretty quickly here. And we're just going to go over this little one on the corner, and it's already starting to come to life already just with that first wash. And so when we're done with our greens, we're just going to make sure that we rinse off that brush pretty well because we don't want that green going in. And we'll start going in with our medium tones, and that's really important step right now that we're going to start doing. So we're going to make sure that this is completely dry, and always use the back of your finger to make sure. Never use the front of your finger because you have a lot of oil on your finger and you never want to do that. And then what you do is we're going to mix a little bit of Opera Rose again, a little bit darker. So it's going to be probably kind of like milk, I would say. So the first lot that we did was kind of like juice. It was really like water, but now we're kind of thickening up that consistency. The thing about watercolors is that it does dry lighter, so you really we'll have to put a couple of layers on this to make it pop. So right now we're doing our medium layer, and so we're making sure that we don't go into that lightest wash, and we're kind of laying down the direction of form that we want it to be going into also. So you don't want to go sideways or horizontal when you have a vertical flower because these lines will start to show up later on with your watercolor. So we're just going to lay down our medium, our mid-tones right now, and we're just going to go over and just quickly, set those down. And we're going to just go in that direction of form, and it's so important that you're just going as the flower petal is going and you lay that down. And this will dry pretty quickly too, again. And you can see how that Copic marker or that Copic multi-liner, it didn't it didn't bleed at all, and so it's just absolutely beautiful. So now I'm just mixing up a little bit of the green, and now we're just going to lay that down too while that pink is drying. So we're just going to lay down our medium tone here, just going over the edges and making sure that we're creating a nice dark border between that petal and those leaves. That's where the darkest shade is. And you can just go online and pick out any beautiful cherry blossom on the internet. You just do a Google search, or even you can go on Pinterest and you can find just so many beautiful cherry blossoms, and you just follow along and look at where the colors and those tones lay down, and you can just create a beautiful cherry blossom watercolor also. Okay, so now I'm just going to grab some of that Opera Rose again, and we're going to make a really thick, creamy consistency. So we've gone from water or juice to kind of milk consistency. Now we're going to kind of like a buttermilk kind of real thick consistency here. And we're just going to lay down our darkest color, just making sure that that is in the middle and at the center of our petals here. And just making sure that it's really nice and creamy. And as you can see on the right, I'm using a plate, and that's what I use for most of my color mixing. I just bought a cheap ceramic plate that I found at the cheap store. It was only a couple dollars. You can just kind of look around too, and it just works beautifully, and it cleans up so easily. I have tried different kinds with plastic and everything, but I find that it stains pretty well, especially with those reds. And you can't get that true color that you're really working for. So this is just a kitchen plate that I have bought at the cheap shop for a couple dollars. Very easy, and it's okay if it breaks because it won't it won't be the end of the world because I didn't invest that much money into it. So again, we're just going through those mid-tones or those dark tones right now and just laying down just a lot of that detail that you can see in that stamp set. So going around the edges and with the center near those leaves. And it's just so beautiful, and you just keep laying down that color. And now we're going to wait for it to dry, and again we're just going to add some of that green. And now I'm just using straight up Windsor green blue shade, and it's just very nice and dark, and you can kind of start seeing the outlines that we're going to be putting in right now. And it's again a very super thick consistency, and I'm still using a number 3 brush right now. I haven't gone down to a number 1 brush yet. So you can use just one brush for the entire flowers of this entire project too. You don't have to switch around if you don't feel like you need to. And again, we're just going to keep going and adding those super, super dark lines here, and you can see that contrast now starting to bloom out, and it's so pretty. Okay, just keep adding that really dark tones here. And again, just going around those edges very beautifully. And while we're doing those pink petals should be almost completely dry for us. And then we can keep working as we can keep going on. So when you're switching around like this, those other petals are drying. So it's creating you can work pretty quickly here. I'm just going over that fine detail there. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to grab a number 5 brush. So I'm grabbing a bigger brush here, and we're going to create a very watery mix again. And this is going to be our lightest tones. And we're going to go over the entire petal, and it's going to move a bit of the ink around, or the paint around, and it's going to create a very soft edges. And you don't want to press down too hard here. You want to just go gently over it, and you can see that those edges and those lines where the mid-tones and the dark tones, you'll probably see a little bit of a hard edge here. This is where it gets to be smoothed down, and it all blends together very quickly and very smoothly. And I find that when you're using that beautiful Arches paper, it's so perfect, and it just works so beautifully, and you don't have any problems moving around that paint as much as you would. Sometimes when you use a cheaper brand, you have to scrub a bit harder with your brush, but with this beautiful paper here, if you invest in it, you'll find how beautiful this is. It really does the work for you. It's just a lovely paper. And you can see it's just really starting to come together, and it's really starting to pop. We're lifting up those colors, and we're adding a bit darker color here. And we're just going to keep going. I'm going to mix up a little bit more here. And I'm using a number 5 brush here, so I can hold a bit more paint on my brush. We can just, keep going through, and you can just see it's just starting to transform just beautifully here. And then the next thing we'll do is we'll move over to our greens, and we'll just rinse off our brush, and then we'll go over, hit those little tiny petals here too, these little buds. And then we'll switch over and we'll do our greens. And so what I'm doing, I'm switching over to a number 3 brush here. I don't want a big, huge brush because it will get too watery, and then I don't want that much water and that much color. I don't need it for this little bit. These are really small little leaves, so we do want to go to a smaller brush here. And again, just going over the entire thing with a really light wash. So we want a lot of water here. We don't want a very big, the thicker the paint is, the darker the color is. So the more water you add, the lighter it's going to be, and that's what we really are going for. So what you can do right now is you can stop. If you want a beautiful light cherry blossoms, I suggest that you stop and then just, go from there. But if you really want to have something darker, like I have on this right here on the left, you're going to have to continuously add layers. And that is really key. So if you want to stop and create a soft, beautiful image, go ahead. It's still beautiful. But I wanted to go for something a little bit richer. The more layers that you add, the richer this is going to be and the brighter it's going to be. And that's really what I'm going for. Always remember that when you're adding those watercolors, they do dry slightly less vibrant than what you've added. So when they dry, they're not as bright as what you put when you put that color down. And so you really, if you want something that is a bit more bold and vibrant and bright, you're going to have to add at least 2 to maybe even 3 layers on here, and that just continuously brings out that color. And as you can see here, I'm adding those midtones again. We've went over the entire flower, and we're just adding those midtones. And again, on these beautiful little buds, just adding a little bit darker midtone. And you can see it's really starting to get a bit brighter. And again, over in the corner here. And now I'm switching over to those midtones with the green. Again, just using that Winsor Newton blue shade. That's all I'm using. And it's the midtones, so we're kind of at a milky consistency. We're not doing a thicker consistency. And we're just going over and hitting those midtones there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit them with that darker. Now I'm going to add that dark, rich consistency for that darkest layer. So we're really going to have that buttermilk consistency again. And I just wanted to show you how thick that was. It's very thick. And so I'm just using a number 3 brush here. And I'm just going in there one more time and adding that darkest tones right here. And you can see that it's just really starting to pop and come out in a beautiful colors here. And it's getting brighter and brighter every time you add another layer. And I didn't add, it's just pure Opera Rose. I haven't added anything else. I'm just using one color so that you guys can also just play around if you just wanted to try a couple colors, because Winsor Newton paints are a bit more expensive than the normal paints, but I think it's really worth the investment if you just buy one paint at a time. I actually went and bought the half pans, and I bought the tubes. I find that it's more economical, and the tubes last. You can get about 2 full half pans with one tube of color that you buy, and it's about $10 for a tube average. I would say $8 to, I think the most expensive one I've bought is $13 here. So now I'm just going to go back over, and I've switched over to a number 1 brush. It's a bit smaller, and I'm adding those darker tones again. And you can see it's just really starting to get beautifully and bold. And I'm just going over that edge work right there, making sure that, if you can see my brushwork here, making sure that I'm really trying not to go for a straight line. You'll see those straight lines. So I'm kind of dabbing, kind of adding a little texture here, going over really close to the edge of those petals. But you don't want a real straight line, because petals and flowers and leaves don't have a very straight line. So you want to give it a little bit more texture than that. And again, just kind of going over. And it's really just popped right now, hasn't it? And again, we're just going to go over that wash one more time. So it's nice and dry again. Just make sure that it's dry before you go over. And again, I'm using a number 5 brush, and I have a very wet consistency. It is like water or like juice. It's very light. And we're just going to go over one more time the whole entire each petal, blending in all 3 layers that we've created into one beautiful layer. And I'm always paying attention to the direction of form here. I'm not going, I'm going the direction that I believe that the petals are going, and I'm not going sideways or anything else, because you will be able to see those lines, that line work, once it does dry. And again, just continuously going over. And I think this is really starting to come together. It's really starting to get brighter. On my first card that I showed you, I actually did 3 layers, I'm only doing 2 layers here for my tutorial. But if you want to go and do another layer like that, just rewind and just watch it again, and you can put on a 3rd or a 4th layer, and you really can have a beautiful, bright cherry blossom flowers if you feel. So I'm just hitting that again with a little bit of the wash on those little buds. And now I'm just going to switch over to the green here. And again, creating it very light with lots of water. And we're just going to go over. And I've switched down to a number, I think that was a number 1 brush here. Nope, a number 3. And I'm just going over because I don't need a whole lot of water on these little tiny flower leaves here. And again, just going over the whole thing, and you can see how it's just blending and coming together. Okay, so I think we're done. We'll just let this dry, and now we'll put this card together. And you can see how beautiful it is. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to go over again with our Copic multi-liner and really put those details in, those little stamens or whatever, the center of those flowers, and just really go over with that black multi-liner and just create a little bit more detail now. And that will really just make this entire cherry blossom just pop. See how beautiful that is? Because that wash and that those watercolors did kind of dull out that black. So we really want to make that black pop out now and contrast against those petals, and you can really see that detail work that I have going on here. And again, just on our 3rd flower here. Just going over, and I've already outlined where I knew that was, that those details were. And see how beautiful that looks? It just pops, doesn't it? It's so pretty. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put together our card. So I've already cut out my cardstock here, and I'm going to stamp directly on it. So I'm going to open it up and grab my mini Misty here and slide it over to the corner and on the side and added the thing. And I'm using the Big Sympathy here, And just adding the peace, prayers, and blessings in the corner here. Just want to make sure that we stamp that on before we get any other layers on there. And I'm using a VersaFine black ink here. I just love that ink pad. It's one of my favorites. And what we're going to do is just press lightly. You only need to stamp once, I think, on this one because it just looks beautiful. And we're just going to put that in the side. And then I'm just going to grab some crochet tape and some crochet trim, and also I'm using some of this beautiful glue. It's my absolute favorite. I use it for everything, and I really think it's worth the investment. I'm just going to add a little bit glue underneath, and then we're going to have a little play here. I had a bit of a hard time making this perfectly straight, so bear with me here. I'm just going to try to make this straight so that you can see. Yes, I had a bit of a problem with that. Didn't want to go straight on for me. All right, and then we're just going to glue right underneath here too, because I didn't put any glue there. I've noticed that that wasn't working very well either, and it wasn't straightening out perfectly. So I'm just using some vintage floral ribbon here too, and I'm just going to add a couple dots here, and we're just going to add that on the corner so you can get, and you can also create a bow. I did it on this one because I just kind of liked it plain, and you can play around and add as much as you want or as little as you want. You really do want to have those cherry blossoms to be that center stage. So I didn't, I put the bow on the first card, but then I was thinking, I don't know, maybe I won't. So I'm just going to add a little bit of glue on the inside of the card too, and we'll go back and cut that off. And of course, I'm playing around again, just got to keep playing and playing with it. And what I ended up using here, because watercolor paper is so heavy, it's really hard to get those foam dimensionals to work. So I actually went and got some wall mounting double-sided sticky tape, and this is very strong, and I ended up getting it at Michael's, and I got it around that frame and mat area, and it's very nice and strong double-sided sticky tape, and it is acid free, so you can kind of look around too if you need something. And then make sure you put one in the middle, because what I've found is that sometimes your card will sag in the center, and we don't want that. So then we just line it up, and then there we have it, a beautiful, great, simple card with a beautiful effect. And you can see on that second card how I put that extra layer on it. It's just a bit bolder. Well, I really hope that you've enjoyed today's tutorial. If you have any questions, don't forget to leave me a message. I'm here to help, and I will see you in the next time. See you later, guys.